sometimes we'll have college kids helping us with fun stuff, do the prize part, and then I can just keep drawing. So tomorrow we should do that after everyone else pick stuff. Okay, this is for 100 pack of glow sticks. These can go on the end of trombones. You can turn the lights off. It's very fun. Or I use it for conducting lesson. So each kid gets first I teach them the conducting pattern, and then they each get a glow stick, and they conduct, we turn the lights off, and they conduct with music. So, glow sticks, Terry Kroger. Come on down. Okay, light sticks or gloss.
Glow stick.
Come on down. All right. Next one. Okay, this is fun. Those of you that heard the story last year, when I was teaching with Cindy, we would go to TDA and we would always save our shower caps from our hotel room. And we would get as many as we could. And it was like the ultimate prize where the kids would wear the shower cap the rest of rehearsal. So I ordered some fancy shower caps. Or gloss. Hillary Morgan. Oh, not here. Okay, I'll put it back in. Last one. Adam Flores. Nope. Oh wait, no, that one's gonna go back in. How'd you have 2 tickets?
One from yesterday.
Oh, today was just the ones who didn't get one yesterday. So that's okay. You won. You're having good luck today. And Christina! She here yet? Oh man.
Show my time.
Candace! Oh! Candace, I know they played this game at her school. So shower cap, which you can give away, or wear if you would like, or the box. All right, she gets a pack of the pencil grips to cut it out for clarinet players. Okay, we're going to get started. Let me do a quick hello to the online, and then we'll talk about oboe. If you just came in and you didn't get a ticket before the 1:30, make sure you get a ticket in there. Yes, I love it. Great. Kelly, if I forget, can you take some pictures throughout and maybe put it back too? I'll try to remember too, but if you any of these where you remember, that would be great. Okay, are we good? Like we're live now? Awesome. Thank you for being here, everybody who is online and in person. For those of you that are joining us for the first time online, if you go to banddirectorstalkshop.com, the very first article is called Band Director Workshops 2024. At the top, you have a schedule for all the clinics that has a professional development tracker where you can track your attendance. And then below that, you have a link for every clinic. For the oboe one, I believe I've uploaded the handout. If not, it will be there in 2 minutes. And the slides, we're working on getting them sent over, so they should be up in the next 10 minutes. In the meantime, we're going to try to make it where you can see the slides. But within the next few minutes, hopefully, if you go back to that, the slides will be there and you'll be able to see that as well. So with that, is it Dr. Bell? Yes. This is Dr. Bell. She's going to talk to us about oboe.
Good morning, everybody. Great to see you. I hope your week's been off to an awesome start, right? Yes? Great. So my name is Dr. Kathleen Carter-Bell, and I teach at WT. I'm also principal oboe of the Lubbock Symphony over here in West Texas, and I have a number of years of teaching experience running collegiate and private oboe studios as well. So I have a lot of thoughts to share with you in the next 50 or so minutes. I also really love questions, so if you have a question about something that I've just said, please feel free to go ahead and ask, or I'll try to also leave a chunk of time at the end so that we can ask questions. When you teach oboe at the university level, you usually end up teaching a variety of other classes. And I wanted to share with you an experience that I had pretty recently, just last year, in one of my music appreciation classes. So in day one, we're just doing introductory stuff. I'm getting to know the students, they're getting to know me. And I always share what my primary area is, which is, of course, the oboe. And I ask if anyone knows what an oboe is. Usually it's pretty good if I have one or two who kind of nod and say, like, I've seen one before, isn't it a woodwind? Or sometimes I'll have someone who's in bands and they say, like, well, I have a friend who played the oboe, it's like a weird clarinet. Which, sure. But last fall, I had a student in one of my music appreciation classes, actually it was a music education major, who said, and I quote, "Oh my God, the oboe is like the hardest instrument." And then he went on to say, "It sounds like a dying duck." Which, I have to be honest, sometimes that is absolutely true. There are a lot of things, though, that we as educators can do to make the oboe more approachable for our students and to help oboists make a beautiful sound. Because when played well, the oboe can be spellbinding and very appealing to young students. And it's kind of sad that there's a major perception, even among musicians, that the oboe sounds bad and is really hard. So, let's get into it. I wanted to really kick things off by acknowledging some of the challenges that young oboists face, because there are a lot of them. So here's a little list. So first of all, playing the oboe can be really isolating. I was the only oboist at my school for the entire time of 5th through 12th grade. I didn't have a single other oboist to talk to or work with, and the only other time that I got to play with other oboes was when I went to things like this, or in my youth orchestra, which I ended up playing in 9th grade. But that was several years of feeling very, very alone on the oboe. So yeah, this can feel lonely. It can feel like you're put on the spot more than other instruments because you're not playing with 5 or 6 friends. It's just you on your part, alone very often. This can also mean that you get forgotten a lot more than some other instruments. Often directors will kind of forget to acknowledge us. We're kind of over to the side or buried in the middle sometimes. Maybe the flutes will need rehearsing, and so the directors will say, "Okay, all the flutes." And the little oboist is sitting there by themselves going, "I played that same part. Should I play? Should I not?" And that can lead to some moments of insecurity for our students. There are some pros to this as well, being alone on your part. It can make us as oboists independent or problem solvers, but of course that takes time. And it can make us that way because we get less help overall. Unfortunately, or fortunately, this is good preparation for your musical career because as a professional oboist, it's one on a part all the time. So you do have to be really responsible for playing your own part. Let's see. Challenge number 2. There are fewer private oboe teachers around. Because there are comparatively so few of us, it follows that there are fewer ensemble directors whose specialty is double reeds. Is anybody an oboist in the room? Okay, how about a bassoonist? Okay, got one. Awesome. But yeah, that kind of makes the point. There are just a lot fewer of us to go around. This means that often our students get less personalized instruction. Obviously, lessons help alleviate this, but there are often fewer oboe teachers around too. Sometimes it's really hard to find a great teacher in your area. I grew up in Pennsylvania, and I had to travel an hour both directions to my oboe teacher, who was in Pittsburgh. And she was great, but it was a big time commitment on the part of my parents, on my part also. And some families just can't afford to take that much time to get to different locations like that. So it creates some extra stress on oboists and their families. Partly due to all of these reasons, oboists often feel behind due to that lack of instruction and some other reasons that we'll get into in a second. Speaking of, challenge number 3 is reeds. Now, I'll go into some detail about reeds in a little bit, but I just right off the bat want to say, reeds are the biggest challenge that all oboists face, even professional oboists. Reeds determine almost everything about our ability to play our instruments. And so if you find a student struggling with tone, with pitch, entrances, doing different dynamics, the reed is the most obvious thing to check and to make a change about if it is not working for your students. Number 4 in the list of challenges is equipment. Getting quality instruments for oboe is pretty challenging. Better quality instruments are expensive. Lots of schools don't have kind of the better tier instruments or don't have enough of them. So double reed players kind of struggle with instruments that aren't kept in good repair. I always say that when it comes to playing issues, there are usually 3 big things. Either the player, the reed, or the instrument. And more often than not, it actually is the instrument that is the problem for these young students. So, one of the trios I was a part of, or I am a part of, last year was the guest ensemble for Campbellsville University. And we gave a concert and gave some lessons and coaching, all of that. And right before the final concert, one of the oboists came up to me and said, "My instrument isn't working. It's broken." And I checked, and a pad had fallen off, and a rod was halfway out, and I think bent. And she had had this instrument looked at earlier that exact same week. So, if that can happen in that space of time, we all know that these instruments can be really finicky and really hard to keep in good repair. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit too. So finally, challenge number 5. The oboe is not a marching band instrument. Students on the oboe often spend, and bassoon, I'll link that in there too, we often spend a lot less time on our major instruments because of marching band season. And don't get me wrong, I love marching band, but a lot of times the oboe is put in the closet until marching band season ends. And then, yet again, the oboists are behind their peers who have been playing at least on their major instrument for most of the season. Embouchures have to be rebuilt. Fingerings have to be re-remembered, and it just takes more time to get stuff together. So it's definitely another challenge. So despite the fact that there are some things that oboists have stacked against them, there are a ton of things that we as educators can do to make life a little bit easier for our young oboes. And it does not have to be completely intimidating to play or to teach. So let's get into some suggestions. So let's start off with some suggestions for starting young oboists. So ideally, you should start students on the oboe when possible. I know that is not always possible, depending on the way that your school is structured. And I know lots of students who have very successfully crossed over from other instruments. I do recommend the flute as the instrument to cross over from, even though the clarinet looks more similar with embouchure and everything, the flute is a little bit easier overall to switch from. But ideally, if we can start on the oboe, that will mean that there are fewer things to change over later, such as that embouchure and fingerings as well. It'll also reduce the risk of overblowing on the reed, particularly if switching from saxophone or from flute. The opening on an oboe reed is tiny. There is not much air that you can get into this at one moment. And it's very different from, say, the needs of a flute player or a saxophone player or many other instruments. And so we have to really adjust the way that we play. It's very hard for students to play something for a couple of years and then switch to oboe and feel like they are back to square one, especially when their peers on other instruments are starting to sound pretty good at that point. So if they have to jump back to the squeaky stage, it's a little bit tricky for sure. So it puts a little extra stress on oboists, and it means that they are less likely to stick with the oboe when they're feeling that uncomfortable. So if they're going through those struggles at the same time as everyone else, that is a good thing. So next, let's talk about who should play the oboe. The bottom line is it should be anybody who wants to play it. There are really no restrictions that I have when it comes to choosing who should play the oboe. There aren't any real limitations of facial shape, lip size, the right embouchure potential, hand position. With the right teacher and the right guidance, anybody can do it. My husband, who's the bassoon professor here, when he was picking his instruments in early middle school, he wanted to play the oboe, actually. And his band director said that because he was so tall and his hands were really large, that he couldn't do it. Now, shouldn't or guiding a student toward another instrument can be a good thing if you think it would be really great for them, but there's absolutely no reason why big, tall men with large hands cannot play the oboe. They've been doing it for hundreds of years at this point. So, if there is another reason, great, but that one probably isn't the best. Lick size, overbite, underbite, all of those things really aren't super relevant. I've seen everyone play at a really high level who has a whole variety of those different things. They just need the right guidance when it comes to it at the end. There are, however, some personality traits that I think are really helpful for playing the oboe. If a student is tenacious and somewhat independent, that can be fantastic for playing on the oboe. If there's a student who wants a unique instrument where they're gonna kind of have to hold their own, hold it down. That is fantastic. When I ask students why they ended up choosing the oboe in the first place, almost 100% say, because my teacher told me it was different, I wanted something that not a lot of other people play, and I wanted a challenge. And that's part of the reason why I chose it. My mom's a musician, pianist primarily, but she also played the flute some. And she said, I was one of 50 flute players at my school. I would recommend that you choose something that not everybody plays. And I was all for that. So if you find a student that kind of fits into that, they'd be a great option for starting the oboe. Then, when students get started, as soon as possible, get them in private lessons with a qualified teacher if there is one in your area. Teachers will help the student develop the correct embouchure, overcome those early reed challenges, and especially help them identify what the problem is in their playing. Because for young students who don't have an embouchure yet, whose instrument is not in good repair, and their reed is terrible, it's really hard to figure out what's going on when you're just getting started. So those teachers will help pinpoint those issues and hopefully fix them pretty quickly. All right, let's get into some fundamentals, my favorite thing. So let's start off by talking about oboe embouchure. Now, if you talk to 6 different oboists, there are going to be different opinions on a lot of these things. But the embouchure that I'm going to describe is one that I feel very strongly will help your students have the best tone, the best pitch, everything. So for an oboe embouchure, I am a big advocate for a non-muting embouchure. So what that means is that we're just not squeezing the reed shut and biting it. Closing down on the reed encourages biting, and that makes the playing sharp and encourages a less than great tone, often more shrill, more, I'd say vibrant, but yeah, just an over-the-top kind of a sound. Students that bite the reed are often uncomfortable on that reed. So if you see them, especially making like a pancake embouchure, which looks kind of like this picture, it's flat, I call it a pancake embouchure, like this, then you need to see about their reed and get them some different options. And usually sharpness and sometimes lack of dynamic range is going to be a problem with that. Instead, we want a round embouchure with a relaxed jaw, which is making some space in their mouth. So we don't want them to force their jaw down and cause any kind of attention, but just relaxing it down in order to add a little bit of space in there will help with tone and pitch and everything. So I help students find this by making a whistle shape with their embouchure. I always say no whistling required because I'm sure, as some of you have taught this, students inevitably will be like, I can't whistle. Doesn't matter, you don't have to whistle in order to do this. So I have them make a whistle shape and then roll their lips in like they're pulling the strings on one of those drawstring bags. So ends up looking like that. Flat chin, corners pointed forward is what we want. We don't want sort of back smiley embouchure for the oboe. We want to support the reed pretty equally on all sides with our muscles up here. A kind of fun way that I've come across for teaching this oboe embouchure is to tell them to make a camel face on the top, so that kind of gets that forward part of it, and down here to imagine you have the tusks of a walrus. So a kind of hybrid animal that we have going on here. And that helps get that flat chin and the top of your lip forward. All right, let's talk hand position next. So on the oboe, fingers should be curved, no straight fingers, because that adds tension in your playing and often will make your facility a lot slower, your technique a lot slower. The usual culprits are the ring finger and the pinkies on the oboe for straightening, and especially students who are double jointed can have those kind of lock in place. I'm a little double jointed, so I had to work really hard for a long time to try to keep my fingers nice and curved on the oboe. So don't let your young oboists look at their clarinet friends and model their hand position off of that, because it won't work the best for the way that the keys are positioned on the oboe. Arms should be relaxed at the student's side. If you see floating arms like this, that also can add tension. It also can raise the pitch because often they're kind of squeezing up and adding tension up here. So we just want everything to be relaxed down, arms relaxed at the side. Also, make sure that they are bringing that oboe up to them rather than coming down to their reed, because we get a lot of hunchbacks on the oboe too. Ideally, the student's chest will just be lifted enough that we create a lot of space here in the torso in order to take some really good breaths. And the head should be up, just straight, rather than up or all the way down at the ground, because that will also help with tone production. Oboe angle is also a question that I get quite a lot from students and directors. The oboe should basically be at a 45-degree angle or less. If you see students playing it up here like this, that's a lot more similar to the European style of oboe playing, and the tone conception is different for European players. So if you see a student doing this, it changes the angle of the reed to the air. This kind of helps make it less strident, which is what we're going for in an American style of oboe playing. So just kind of relaxed down here. Alternatively, we don't want it squished in like this. So a Goldilocks approach to everything, right in the middle, is pretty much what we're going for all the time on the oboe. All right, so next up, let's talk about support and air use on the oboe. All right, so for the oboe, because the reed is so tiny, we actually don't require that much air to play, but we need to use it in a very specific way in order to be successful with it. So when I was in high school, our band director would always tell all of the woodwinds as a group, more air. And I absolutely know what he was going for, and he's absolutely correct. But on the oboe, actually what we need is fast, supported air, not necessarily more of it. Because if we just try to blow more air at these little tiny openings, we're going to overload it very quickly. It's going to go sharp, and we're going to just get all red, and we just can't blow that much air in it. It's not physically possible. Like, as I try to blow more air, there's a certain point at which I just can't get any more air in. So, for your oboists, instead of saying more air, maybe conceptualize it as fast air. We do need our air speed to be very high in order to get the reed vibrating, in order to get volume, all of that on the oboe. We also want to feel like our abdominal support is working hard at all times. And definitely when I'm working with young players, like here this morning, everywhere, support is the biggest thing that I'm talking about with these students. I often tell my students to imagine that they are clenching a softball low in their stomach with these low muscles kind of all in this area. A softball is nice and dense, and so when you grip it, it feels very compact. And that's what I want to go for. And I am clenching that and staying that solid the entire time that I am playing. Am I working hard? Yeah, absolutely I am. But if I'm not, then that creates a lot of problems with the reed entrances, pitch, tone, pretty much everything. You can try giving students a piece of paper or like a note card and having them stand against the wall and blow against it. And if they're able to keep it up there, then that means that their airspeed is probably going to be high enough to play on the oboe. All right, let's talk about focusing the air. I think I've mentioned that already. But again, as educators, we often say, focus the sound. It's a little bit different on every instrument what that really means. So for the oboe, since we have such a small opening on these reeds, we really need to funnel the air in so that it's not this huge column coming right at the reed, but that it's narrowed. So we aim it in there just a little bit more. And that's what I call the focus. Unfocused air, so just hurling everything that you have at the reed, air-wise, is exhausting. It makes us play sharp or flat, depending on the reed. And so the analogy that I often use to explain the need for focusing the sound to students is thumb over the garden hose. So we've all watered our garden at some point without the little nozzle thingy on, and if we just let it, the water just sort of spills out as this huge cascade down onto the ground. That's not very effective. We're just kind of throwing all the water that we have in one place. It's not going anywhere. But if we want to spray all the way across the yard, or if we want to spray further in our garden, if we put our thumb over the garden hose to adjust how much water can come out at a time, we get this nice fan of fast, focused, projected water that we can, aim at our family and friends and all that. And so that is a really good way to conceptualize of what we're doing on the oboe. So the next step is to figure out how to actually feel that, because that is kind of tricky. There's some exercises that I usually have my students to find this feeling. So let's all do it together. So first of all, I tell my students, we're going to do some fake coughs. Put your hand on your throat and fake cough. Yeah, we feel the vibrations in there, right? Okay, we have control over what goes right here in our throat. Now we're going to make a really dumb sound, okay? We're all going to go, ah. Okay. Ah. Again, we can choke off that air if we really want to. I also ask if they like to go swimming, and if they can go swimming and hold their breath underwater without holding their nose and with their mouth open. So let's all hold our breath, mouth open, nose not held. Yeah, so this spot here in our throat, that is what we need to have control over in order to focus the sound on the oboe. This is one of the things that produces the best tone on the oboe. So if you have students who their sound is bright and unwieldy, get them to practice this focus. Now, obviously, we don't want to stop all of the air. We need quite a bit of it in order to play the oboe. But putting a little bit of the thumb over the garden hose here will help produce that really good sound. So I have 3 contact points that I focus on when I play the oboe. That is my embouchure, my support, and the focus in my throat. So I'm thinking about these 3 spots constantly when I play. All right. So next thing is tone. So this is very closely related to what we were just talking about with focus. When students don't focus the sound, it is uncontrolled and spread, and that's when we get that dying duck analogy that comes up. So starting there with the focus will really help your students play with a better tone. I view the oboe very much like singing. I talk about singing a lot. I sang all through high school. I sing all the time now in lessons. And so having your students sing along with playing the oboe is extremely helpful. It helps them be aware of the mouth shapes that we want in order to play the oboe. And I want to aim for a nice, warm, rich, round sound. And voicing, or when we sing, we have to think about that a lot. So it makes students aware of that. So definitely, even if they're not singing, talk to them about mouth shapes. We want ooh instead of e, so we want that space in order to make the best sound possible. The reed also very much matters here. So if you have a student and they're doing all the right things in terms of embouchure and focus and their air usage, but they have a terrible reed, it's just not going to get any better until they fix the reed. So advise your students to check on their reed. Listen also to great musicians, great oboists, great singers. All of that is going to contribute to developing a rich, warm, beautiful tone that we all want them to have so that they can blend in our ensembles, which is often a challenge. All right. Let's talk about vibrato. So some take the it will come on its own approach to teaching oboe vibrato, and that's actually fine for most oboists. Usually it develops on their own. But if some students are frustrated with it not coming and want to get it a little faster, here are a few tips. So first of all, talk to them about where the vibrato should be formed for the oboe. It's not only from their abdominal muscles. That's where a lot of bassoonists have their vibrato coming from. It's a little too slow for the oboe though. We also don't want them doing it with their embouchure. It can create a very mechanical kind of a sound, which sounds kind of like a car alarm or something, and definitely doesn't sound natural. Let me show you what it sounds like just from the abs. It's hard to get the speed that we need for the oboe. So instead, we're going to go to the spot in our throats that we were for the focus. So what I do is I have my students do a combination of abdominal vibrato plus their throat pulses, and that usually creates the right kind of sound, which is about the right speed for what we want on the oboe. So in order to get this feeling, I have my students put their hand on their throats. So let's all try this together. And then I have them say ooh in a pulse, usually with a metronome. So I have them start with quarters. Let's all do it. Ooh, 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 and then moving on to eighths in a second. Ooh, triplets. Ooh, 16ths. Ooh. And it starts to get a little harder as you need to develop some of those skills. And often students will kind of top out at triplets to begin with. I have them do it singing, then I have them do it on the reed, then I have them do it on the oboe, and just one note at a time. And once they can do that, then they're pretty much set for getting that vibrato started. That helps develop the control that they need in order to get that vibrato going. All right. Yes?
When do you introduce oboe vibrato?
That's a great question. Definitely not in the first year. I want them to be focusing on a whole bunch of other things. I'd rather have them work on tone before vibrato, for sure. And again, once the tone is really developed and they're focusing here, then adding that next layer on top of that works. Really, it depends on the student. So probably like in my private studio, I usually do that in year 2, like once they've been playing for a full year at least. By the time they hit high school, if they haven't been doing vibrato, that's when we really start to work on it in earnest. And it depends how many other issues are more pressing, I would say, when it comes to their playing. Great question. Anybody else have any questions for the time being? Yeah?
Could you relate it to like singing vibrato, or is that something different?
I do. I mean, that's one of the ways that I feel it, is like a singer. So yeah, I do. I do want students to feel it as very measured initially, and then I sort of just let it roll once they can really get that feeling. So probably a little more measured than most singers would feel it, but then once it's going, it feels a little more natural. Yeah, let's go here and then here.
If you can't start students on oboe because you have limited like school instruments,
Yep.
what is your best like recommendation for what instrument to start them on?
Flute.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I recommend flute because then they're not having to switch from a clarinet embouchure, which is almost the exact opposite of what they need for the oboe. And the fingerings on flute are relatively similar. So I know clarinet, because it's held in the same way, it seems like that's a really great option, and it can be fine. But I like flute.
This may be in your handout. Do you have favorite oboists for kids to listen to?
Yes. Okay. Elaine Dubas, who's principal oboe of the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra. She just retired. I love her. Eugene Izotov, who was in Chicago but is now in out in San Francisco. I believe that there are a few more listed in there, but I'd be happy to give a longer list too. But that's just 2 to start.
Is it written in there?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Because yes, Russian name, yeah, for Eugene Izotov, yeah.
Because dyslexic.
Totally. It should be written in there, and if it isn't, I can catch you after.
Thank you.
Cool. I'll dive back in, but then I'll leave some more time in a little bit. So entrances are hard on the oboe. There are some steps that help make it less hard, but the big thing is don't let your oboists breathe too soon or too late. If they're too early, they're holding in position for too long, and it can mess up the entrance. If it's too late, they don't have enough time to go through all of the steps and things that they need in order to get a really good entrance. So here are the steps written out, but it all happens as one fluid motion, ultimately. So first of all, we're going to breathe out. Breathing out on the oboe is almost as essential as breathing in, because we don't use up all of our air when we play. We get a surplus of carbon dioxide that builds up in here, and we have to breathe out before we can breathe in, or else we explode at some point. Almost literally. So make sure that your students are breathing out. Then they breathe in on step 2. Step 3 is jam-packed. At the same time, we engage our support. We engage our embouchure on the reed. We put our tongue in the tip of the reed, and that is like a stopper in a bottle. And that helps prevent any false starts whenever we're making entrances. I'm blowing air, but nothing's coming out because my tongue's on the tip of the reed. Then, when it comes to the entrance, everything's already engaged. I'm blowing already, And all I have to do is release my tongue. And then it's ready to go. If we don't do it that way, we can start early, we can start late. It's very unpredictable. Usually, once I explain the steps to my students, then I turn on the metronome and I have them think about it in a meter, because we need to make sure they can do it at the right time. So usually what I say is think in a 4-4 meter, breathe out on 3, in on 4, and the tay, or the and of 4, is when all of that other stuff happens. Right, out, and then the downbeat will be when we actually play. So have them practice it with a metronome. Yes?
Do you have them, do you talk about which blade or both blades to tongue?
Great question. I tongue directly in the tip of the reed. If anything, it's slightly below, definitely not on top, but we really want our tongue to just be going in the tip of the reed like this.
So in between the two blades?
In between the two blades, yeah. Yeah, sure. And that'll help with speed as well. All right. So let's troubleshoot a few things on the oboe. So let's talk about teaching fingerings. There are a lot of judgment calls to make when it comes to which notes to start first. If you're using a method book, you can just follow that and that'll give you a progression. I usually like teaching B, A, G, F sharp, E, D first, because it's just adding 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Keeps it really simple. And all it requires is just walking down the keys on the oboe. Flat keys, or flat key signatures, are really hard for young oboists to play in, which is really unfortunate, because we play in B flat quite a lot whenever we're starting off in band. So remember, it's very tricky for young oboists. The problem that we run into is what we call the F, D flat, and E flat problem. So we have 3 different options for fingering F on the oboe. If you were using regular F, which is this, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and then the little banana key, or one of my students told me it looks more like a taco, so we call it the taco key. This is regular F. But to get to E flat, we have to hop down here to get to the E flat fingering. Or to D flat, same thing, we have to hop. So obviously that's going to give us some notes in between those. We don't want that. So we have some alternate F fingerings. The easiest one that most of us end up teaching immediately to our young oboists is forked F. Because if you're on E flat, all you have to do to play forked F is lift your middle finger, and that gives you F. The problem with that is forked F is not a nice note on the oboe. This is probably all dried out. It's not super bad on my oboe, but on certain oboes it's really, really bad. So here's regular F. Here's forked F. Not a great sound. And especially for young students, it can be really strident. So the best alternative is to get them using left F or side F, whichever one you want to call it. And all that is instead of doing the regular F with the little taco key, you play this key that's up here on top on the left-hand side of the oboe. That is the best alternative. If you teach them forked F and don't introduce left F, if you wait a really long time to do that, they will fight tooth and nail to avoid using left F. And left F is essential to playing harder pieces of music. Forked F is kind of like a stopgap, but it's not a really good solution. So the sooner you can get them using left F, the better. So I highly recommend introducing that pretty early on. All right, the oboe is neither the instrument that can play the loudest or the softest. We are kind of a middle of the road kind of an instrument. Please take pity on your oboists when it comes to diminuendos, because at a certain point, it's really easy for it just to cut out. There's a certain point at which it's really hard to keep the sound going and get any softer. And it's also very much reed dependent. Students can work on developing their dynamic range by doing long tones, so get those in their rotation as soon as possible, but we're never going to be able to do diminuendos like a clarinet can. So again, just take a little pity, and if it's a part in a piece that has clarinets and oboes diminuendoing at the same time, maybe have your clarinet stay louder a little longer to help your oboists not cut out too early. All right, pitch troubleshooting. The oboe is an extremely pitch flexible instrument. So let me just demonstrate. Depending on how much reed you have in your mouth, depending on the reed, it can change everything about where your pitch lies. That's why historically oboes have tuned orchestras. We don't have tuning slides. Our reed is what it is that day, and ideally everybody tunes to us. We're high maintenance that way. However, it really doesn't work like that anymore. We need to play at 440 no matter what. And so oboists need to be able to adjust very, very well. So if you find that your oboists are flat on their reeds, here are some things to check. Probably they need more support. That's the first one. They probably need faster air. You also can check their reed. Is their reed flat? Is it cracked? Is it so open that they just can't play in tune? A lot of reed things that it could be. Also check for their voicing, like we were talking about earlier. They can't be so open here that they can't control pitch. So they might need to just close up their jaw just a little bit to adjust for that. You can also check how much reed is in their mouth. You saw as I was adjusting for pitch, I was pulling the reed in and out basically. So depending on where they are on the reed, that can adjust. You can adjust flatness that way too. So sharpness is pretty much the opposite. Is your student biting and clamping down on the reed? I'm biting the reed and making it go really sharp. If they're blowing too much air, not in the right way, it might be overloading the reed and causing it to close down, therefore making it sharp. Like that. So you can check the reed then also. Is it too closed? Is it really old? Have they been using it for 6.5 months? All of that can have a major impact on the pitch. So drone work and tuner work helps fix this. With oboists, definitely make sure that they aren't only relying on their tuner. Because we are so pitch flexible, once you take that away, they often don't have a great frame of reference for pitch. So make sure that they are doing listening exercises for tuning as well as using the needle tuner. All right, let's talk about water in oboes. This is a big problem. Water can be caused by a lot of different things. The tiny little bore of the oboe, it's really tiny up at the top where the reed goes. I mean, it is exactly this width at the very top of the oboe. So it's really little in there. Humidity, a rainy day, can cause oboe to get sucked up into the tone holes. Water just gets sucked up in the tone holes and make a bad sound. If it's too cold, blowing hot air into a cold instrument will often get water in those keys. Holding the oboe upside down on your lap so that the keys are resting on your lap as opposed to facing up, that can cause the water to rotate and just slip right in all of those keys. Looking at the oboe the wrong way can cause water. We have water all the time. So students need to know how to get it out. First of all, you can blow it out. So in order to do this, you need to use fast, supported, strong air. It sounds like that. You can hear it all the way at the back of the auditorium. If an oboist is blowing it out in the middle of a piece, it's not ideal. But if they have a solo coming up and need to get it out quickly, that's the best way. Little tiny puffs, that's not going to do it. You have to blow really strong air in order to get that out. Then, we also use cigarette paper. Now, when I tell my students' parents, that they need cigarette paper for the oboe, they look at me like I'm insane. And yeah, I get that. So a lot of my students don't actually have this, and it's a problem. Getting water out with this is the best way to do it. It's very absorbent. You put it under the key, and then you take the top joint off, put it under there, and blow into it to suck that water out. And that's one of the other really fast ways to get water out of your instrument. Otherwise, swabbing is really important. Yes? Yes, those are good too. They're a little thick for oboe. Yeah. Which is why I don't always recommend them, but yeah, those pad dryers can be very helpful.
Yeah.
It's worth a shot. Yeah?
And non-gummed.
Yes, thank you for adding that. Non-gummed, if any of your parents allow your students to get it, and non-gummed is really important because if it's gummed, it'll gum up the keys. Good. Getting the oboe cleaned will help with getting water out as well by a professional. They'll remove the octave vents, clean it out with alcohol. That's the way to do it. All right, let's get into reads now, because this is one of the most important bits. Fundamentals. All of this will only help you so much if you have a bad read. So the read basically determines everything. So it's really important to be as consistent with them as, or have students be as consistent with them as they can and find really good ones. The perfect read, I couldn't decide on a name, so I added all of them. The perfect read does not exist. Not for your students, not for the principal of the Chicago Symphony. They exist for no one. However, there are some things that we can be on the lookout for to get better reads. The first thing, well, actually the third thing on this list, avoid commercially made reads. This is really important, and one of the things that I can't exclaim more in this session. Jones reads and other commercially made reads are not good. They often will hold your students back. I brought a couple of really old Jones reads, and actually they look better than the ones that I've seen in the past couple of years. But that's what they sound like. By contrast, this is one of my reads. You can just hear the difference in the read alone. The tone, you can already tell, is going to be so much better on a different read. The Jones reads are often extremely flat. The only good thing about them is that they're cheaper. And for beginning, absolutely beginning students, that can be just fine. During that phase where they're chipping it on their tooth, hitting it on the stand, everything, that's okay. But once they get past that stage, try to get them on something better, because they're going to be frustrated by the tone, the pitch, pretty much everything. The read alone should crow about a C, pitch-wise, and that will help students play in tune. So that's a test you can do with your students' reads. All right, so instead of getting those Jones reads, get handmade reads. They're more expensive, but pretty much everything else is going to be a pro. They're tonally better, response, pitch, blend, entrances, everything. And it'll make playing so much more fun, so you'll be able to retain your oboe players in band as well, which is really important. I have a ton of recommendations for handmade reads that you can purchase and order online. Karen Crutchfield, who's here, sells reads, I sell reads, and there are tons of people who sell them, especially on Etsy. So you can get on there and order handmade reads from a lot of different sources. I recommend for all of my band director friends to use some of their budget to buy some great reads that they have on hand, because inevitably there will be a disaster that happens on concert day and your students will have broken their last working read. So have a couple of those stashed away in your office. So when it comes to reads, watch out for Jones reads. Watch out for the same read that has been used for months and months and months. We want lots of reads at any time that the student can play. At least 3, but that's the absolute minimum that they should have on hand. Watch out for cracked tips, crushed tips, missing corners on those reads. All of those things are going to make it really hard for them to play. I had a student come in with a reed that they had literally smashed on the music stand, and it had a huge crack down the entire center and the side, and they were like, it got really hard. Yeah, it would. But those are not, there's no saving it. Just cut your losses, get another reed. So looking in the tip of the reed is really helpful for figuring out what's going on. All right, reed care. Have your students get a case and get a good one. Those little coffins that they come in, I have some sitting over there for those Jones reeds, that's not good. They roll out of those really easily and then they'll break. Have your students soak the reed in water. Put an arrow to that. Make them get a little reed cup like this or something to hold water and have them soak their reeds in that. That will help them last a lot longer. Oboists should also alternate reeds and not use the same one forever and ever until it's absolutely dead, because then playing the new one will feel really bad at that point. It'll feel way too hard. They should rotate reeds in order to break them in. The bottom line is that reeds wear out, and it's a reality of oboe playing that you can't get emotionally attached to a certain reed, and you just have to have a lot on hand ready to work with. Along with this, have your students protect the reed. So it's ideal if students aren't holding the oboe down on their lap in concerts, but keep them vertical to protect that reed. Accidents happen with alarming frequency when it comes to concerts. All right. And I think the last thing that I was going to say, and then maybe we'll have a second for questions, is oboe care. As I mentioned earlier, oboes are finicky. Oboes need regular checkups, and ideally from an oboe expert instead of your local music shop, although they can be great. But the oboe has a lot of specific things that not everyone is prepared to deal with. Of course, we have the normal things. Pads wear out, rods get bent. But in addition, we have adjustment screws, which adjust the balance between almost every single key on the oboe. If even one of those is out of adjustment, like half your notes won't play. And so sometime we can do a whole clinic on adjusting oboes because it's a really helpful skill to have. But it does take a little bit of finagling to get it. If your oboes are wooden, have your students humidify them in the winter. I just usually put a little sponge in the cases. And there are a lot of benefits of plastic versus wooden instruments, which I won't get into now, but just consider that for your students' needs, their age, etc. And again, they are very fragile, so don't let your students leave them on the bus, in hot cars, etc. Make them take it everywhere with them. If you're buying new instruments for your school, make sure they have the specific keys that absolutely need to be on oboes. Left F is the main one of those. Low B flat is important. That's this key out over here. And then if it's a higher level instrument that you're getting, it'll have this already, but the third octave key is really helpful for playing extra high notes on the oboe. Yes?
Could you talk about when it's used?
Yeah, the third octave key? Yes, absolutely. So that is, I use it starting at high F above the staff. And for any of those notes up there, F, F sharp, G, which are most of what they come across, not a ton, but sometimes, that will help make it a little bit easier to play up. Good. I have some other resources that are in those handouts that I gave you, some specific oboe supply places, which might be worth checking out. But I think with that, I'm at the end of my little spiel. Oh, I do have an organization with my husband called Double Talk Workshop, where we do workshops for educators. We have them bring instruments and play. And so we help you learn how to play instruments. We also have a lot of resources online with that. And here's my contact info. Yes?
What's your favorite fingering chart to use? Like Woodwind Fingering Guide or Fundamental?
That's a great question. It would be my teachers. And actually, Austin Brake, who's an educator down in Houston, made one for me. So on his website, Austin Brake, B-R-A-K-E, I can send that to you as a link.
B-R-A-K-E.
Yes. But he made one for me, which is the one that I like and approve of.
Online, someone asked, they said in their music store, they carry Lesher reeds.
They're about the same as Jones reeds, maybe slightly better, but basically the equivalent. Yes?
Singing Dog and Vocal Majority.
Yeah.
Where are you at with those?
I like both of those. The thing with Vocal Majority is they have so many different reed makers that it's hard to say that they're like all great. They're not all great. I've had some students get some reeds from them that aren't great, and I've had them get some reeds that are very good. So if they find they order a certain type that ends up being really great, keep ordering that specific kind. Singing Dog reeds are good. Wildflower, which is also based in Texas here, is good. I can give you a longer list too.
I will say a couple of years ago though, I just had my kids start ordering from Karen.
Yeah.
And it would be even easier if I'd order and let them buy from me. I just don't, but they do it. And so depending on my kids will do that. And I didn't know she made them too, but if you can find an individual where, like I know Karen's when they come are a little hard and the kids have to break them in.
Right.
And they've just learned that, but they last a long time.
Right.
They're really good.
If you can convince your students to break in reeds, it'll help them immensely because they take it out of the little box that it comes in and they're like, this is not good. It's like, no, you need to break it in and then it will be good.
Could you detail that process?
Yeah, basically they just need to pull it out in band and blast on it for a while. They just need to play on it for a long period of time. If they have a private teacher, that's ideal because then we can just scrape on it a little bit, make it a little less heavy for them because that's basically what you're doing by playing. You're just speeding up the process when you do some scraping. So have them play, have them not worry about it being loud, and have them break it in that way. Yes?
I'll come back to your comment about the students really nice play. We have one year 7 girl who's just started.
Yeah.
I did 1 semester on oboe, but I don't ever feel like I'm qualified to help her. Is having someone with her, regardless, better than nothing? I am a flute player, so
I think yes. I definitely know that, I mean, like when my husband started bassoon, he was handed a method book and shoved in a practice room and said, figure it out. And a lot of the students can, and that can be okay if, you know, depending on the structure of your school, it's not always possible to be everywhere at once. But I would say if you can give them some help, some instruction, you know more than they do. So anytime that you can give some tips, even if you're not an oboist, I think it can only help encourage them to keep going. And you know, you might see that their finger's slipping off a key. Like you obviously would know that, and so you can help them with some things like that. Was there another question at the back? Yeah.
So when you order the handmade reeds,
Yes.
Do they have a like soft, medium, hard?
They do, and some places have even more in terms of the options. I usually don't recommend the soft reeds because they often have the worst tone. Usually they're making those for extreme beginners, and so it's okay if they've just gotten started, but usually the medium reeds will have a slightly better tone, and the harder reeds will last longer. So it's kind of depending on your needs. You can decide that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have a couple oboists that are coming to me this year, and I'm like you, I did like a semester on oboe. But my specific question would be, I live in Houston, so it's already very humid. Yep. So your comment about the sponge in the case?
I wouldn't do that in Houston. I would do the opposite, probably. I would in my office. I'd probably have a dehumidifier.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, sure. So when it comes to these instruments, they are very weather dependent. So like during the winter, since our oboes can crack with too little humidity, up here in Amarillo, we need to humidify them. Most places in the winter, I would say, I just have, literally I have a little plastic sandwich baggie and a little sponge that I just keep in my case. It works as well as anything more expensive that you could buy. So I humidify it for that reason, to keep it from cracking and to keep the pads where they should be. If you're in a place like Houston, or like I went up to Brevard to play for a summer in North Carolina in the mountains, it got so humid that sometimes, well, like the bassoonists every now and then would have to pull out a hairdryer and literally hairdry the joints to pull the instruments apart. So in that case, you just don't need to humidify. I mean, maybe sometime during the winter, but probably not. So I just keep a little humidity gauge in my office, since I deal with this all the time, and just sort of monitor it. I just want it to stay kind of in the middle, is kind of what I want to do. If it gets too low, I get a little nervous.
So I'm going to say, let's do this, because I want to make sure y'all can go eat and get back in time so we can start the box at 1:25, okay? So if you have individual questions, I'm sure she'll be available for a few minutes. Come on up and talk with her, but that way everybody else can get going to go eat. Send on the group me where you're going to go eat so people can meet up. Fast food's a good choice at lunch, or the norm. Thank you.